What's going on, everybody? This is James Grandmaster Facts Boyce. You are here for another episode of the Facts Project. Today, very special guest, repeat guest, Dave Schwartz, here to talk about Confederate Monster issues 1 through 5. We're almost at the totality of this thing. Thank you for coming here, Dave.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So to get right into this, I mean, I know we talked about the origin story the last time that you were on the show, but the main reasoning, and if you could repeat it again for our folks, of course, on in the audience, as to why Daniel is now in the United States and why he kind of escaped. And if I'm remembering this correctly from the Mary Shelley stories, actual Frankenstein is derived in Switzerland, in Geneva. So actually, why he left to come to America.
Right. So, well, I mean, and the main character, as we know him as Daniel, is
Yeah.
Igor, and Igor wasn't even in the original Mary Shelley book. He was
Mm.
added in the movie. So that was a character that's not a canon character from the original script.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's actually part of the reason why I chose that character as my main character, because there has been less sort of fleshed out about this person.
True.
Uh, Plus, I felt like their character had the most um, opportunity to sort of see where their life could go beyond the original story, and kind of shape everything about the story around that. So Igor leaves after he and Victor reanimate the original monster. The original monster goes on a rampage
Hmm.
across the village, just laying waste to everything, until he finally sort of just makes his way into the forest, not to be seen for quite some time. Victor is hauled off to an insane asylum, and Igor discovers a little cache of supplies that Victor had put together in the case that something went wrong, and uses that to travel across the ocean to establish a new life for himself in Virginia, until the Civil War breaks out, and he kind of finds himself stuck in the middle of this conflict.
Yeah, and I'm almost wondering like if he knew initially what he was getting himself into. Unfortunately, people realized his skill set, and particularly in this case, he is now basically in charge of reinvigorating the Confederate Army
Right.
into out of all of their dead soldiers in sort of a reincarnation process to turn them all into what was the initial project of Frankenstein's monster into the entire Confederate Army to rebuild those ranks and now take on the Union Army.
Right. And, not only to have bolstered their ranks, but at the same time, using undead creatures that could very, easily be largely perceived to be immortal in ways.
Yeah.
I there's a an issue 0 to this whole series that basically tells the story of how, what happened after the original monster was reanimated, and
Mhm.
how we got to where the issue 1 begins. Basically, a recap of what I just explained a minute ago. And so in that book, I kind of allude to the fact that the original monster is very hard to kill, just all nearly indestructible.
Mhm.
And I think that's, again, another reason why it would be desirable for the Confederacy to not only have their army back, but to have seemingly an invincible army, that they could just, not have to worry about these little tiny campaigns all over the place. Just straight shot right to the White House, take out the leader, and that's it.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a formidable challenge for sure, and I think that it might actually be not, maybe not even the only supernatural thing that the Confederacy has tried to do in order to win the war. Because I sort of set it up in the beginning that they're losing, they know they're losing, so that they've done some pretty um, monstrous sort of things in order to be able to turn the tide in their favor.
Right. And also by the looks of it, outside of issue 4 with the complete turnaround from Daniel or Igor, as we want to call him, as to walking away from the Confederate army, they decided to even come up with a plan B because now Victor Frankenstein is back stateside, almost replacing Daniel in the job that he was doing.
Right. So the original plan really was actually to get Victor,
Hmm.
but when they discovered that after being in an insane asylum for quite some time, Victor, his mind is not there. So that's part of the reason why they went after Igor. But as you'll see in the series, for those of you who haven't read it yet, there is a method in order for us to get Victor's mind back. He kind of teams back up with, Igor. They have a very strong sort of father-son type relationship. The relationship between these two in my story is more of a mentor-mentee kind of relationship, less master-servant,
Yeah.
which is traditional. So I always saw them as, or at least in my story, as that, like a father and son kind of thing, like, Igor trying to live up to his, example. And so in that way, I also wanted this story, to be kind of a reconciliation for the two of them because they haven't
Right.
seen each other in so long. And if you really, go back and read issue 0, and see kind of where they left off, right after the monster was reanimated the first time, it's pretty tough, So I
Mhm.
can imagine that for them coming back together 8 years later, it would be equally as challenging, which it is. So again, this story is a very different Frankenstein story. It's
Mhm.
not the same tropes. There are similarities, that I feel like in ways almost every Frankenstein story needs some elements. But in this story, it's not just the same thing that you've been seeing with every Frankenstein story over and over and over.
Mhm.
Like this is totally new, totally different setting, totally different kind of relationships, and new characters. So
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, in issue 4, you kind of find out after Igor is finally revealed and evidently wants no parts of what is basically going on, his family starts to get threatened.
well, yeah, I mean, the whole sort of precipice of him being convinced to even work with the Confederacy in the first place is
Hmm.
his wife is captured.
Yeah.
So I I feel like I wanted to give um, I wanted to give it like a gruesome quality, because it is, after all, a wartime kind of story.
Yeah.
Um, it fits really well with the sort of gruesome nature of what the original Frankenstein story was all about. And so, because of that, I knew that there were just certain things I wanted to kind of push the envelope with a little bit, put some characters through some pretty torturous moments. If you go to the Kickstarter and look at the preview pages, there's a little scene where, the bride is all, cut up. She's,
Angled.
dissected.
Yep.
She's kind of waking up mid dissection, and things like that. Because again, I felt like the story needed a certain element like that in order for it to feel authentic in a way.
Yeah. And also within issue 5, it seems like the gang is all getting back together. Aside from just Victor, Frankenstein's monster's back. The bride is already there. So there's all these pieces are now like, because this is 6 issues, you kind of realize, okay, shit's really about to hit the fan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, I wanted to bring back familiar characters. This is a Frankenstein property, so I think certain characters are just needed. So I wanted to make sure that slowly over the course of the last several issues, we are, starting to incorporate more and more of these characters back together. And then, in issue 5, um, it's more about ramping up the conflict, bringing in the main sort of villain, because we've had like one villain avatar this whole time, uh,
Hmm.
but we interject, or we actually introduce more of a overarching villain, So like if we've been basically playing with Darth Vader for a little while, and now we're getting into the Emperor. You know
Like
what
the
I mean?
Palpatine of the whole thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So we've got our Palpatine now, starting out issue 5 with this rampage of undead soldiers heading towards the White House. And there's going to be a bunch of those pages going forward where it's just classic Civil War battles.
Right.
The thing I've done with the undead Confederate soldiers is, if they're not using their bare hands or their teeth, they've got like axes and just like kind of like more brutal weapons. Some of them are brandishing swords, but none of them are working with guns. It's
Right,
more
right,
like
right.
brutal, almost like medieval,
Barbaric.
yeah, medieval sort of approach to warfare.
Now, when you were bringing up the Darth Vader Palpatine connotation, is that more so like the Robert E. Lee Jefferson Davis type of deal?
So, well, I was speaking more to like Nathan Bedford Forrest and Stonewall Jackson. So like
Ah, okay.
Stonewall Jackson's like my Palpatine, and
Which
uh,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I mean, I wanted to make it at least somewhat comparable to what we know of history and these men. Bedford Forrest was the original Grand Master of the KKK.
Hmm.
So I wanted to utilize real characters, um, as as my villains, as guys that were just as nasty in real life as they are in the pages of this book. I even sort of make the relationship between Forrest and Jackson a bit of that, like not just so much like mentor mentee, but because I see them as more of colleagues, but at the same time, Forrest sort of sees himself a little not as great as.
Hmm.
He kind of sees Stonewall as this sort of great, leader,
Hmm.
almost like a religious sort of, figure. But these guys are willing to do whatever they need to do to win. If it goes against the word of God, which Robert E. Lee is not down with. I do a little bit of a scene with them in issue
Yeah.
5, because I felt it was important to at least touch on Lee and why he's not part of this overall story, because I felt like that was like the obvious choice for my villain
True.
actor. But I figured I would place him more in the camp of I'm going to win this war the old-fashioned way. I don't need your ridiculous ghost story tales
Hmm.
to help me win this war, kind of thing. Plus, it's a crime against God,
Right, right.
whereas Jackson and Forrest, they're more
We'll do anything to win.
yeah, they're more aware of their shortcomings and the fact that like doing it the old-fashioned way or the conventional way is just not going to work. So we need to like seek out other avenues, even if they may be fantastical or monstrous, whatever the case may be. We need to win. So.
Right, right. Now, what exactly, I mean, I don't want you to spoil anything, but what exactly tends to be the one driving force that awakens in Victor and Igor to be like, all right, we just like think we've done enough here and we have to alarm everybody. So now it's almost like we have to warn President Lincoln as to what's to come.
Well, I mean, their real goal was to just the two men, was to bring back the bride,
Right.
to get her back from the dead.
Hmm.
So if they can get her back, that's really all that they're worried about. But in doing so, they've proved the process, and not only that, but there are sort of Confederate scientists in the wings that have been observing and soaking up all the knowledge of how to do this process. So
Right.
once they do it once to completion and it works, the cat's out of the bag.
Hmm.
They know what to do now. So not only do Daniel and Victor get kind of what they want, but in doing so, they kind of give the Confederacy exactly what they want, and now they're expendable. So they're thinking like, okay, well, they're most surely planning on killing us. So now we need to flee, and figure out what our next move is going to be. And that's sort of what happens in the beginning of issue 4.
Mm,
Is them trying to escape, and being met up with a group while they're gathering their supplies, and the original monster comes back into the fray to save them.
mm,
So yeah, it's I again, I wanted to try to approach it in a way that made sense, that the plot was really driving things forward, but that a lot of the characters and their choices would, put them in the situations that I needed them to be in.
yeah.
And so so far, I think it's going in the way that I definitely want it to go. I've actually rewritten issue 6 half a dozen times. Um,
Wow.
just trying to get the right like key moments.
Mm.
I think I'm pretty sure I finally got 6 down. Obviously, I've got 5 down because I'm working on it. But yeah, it's crazy because I've been writing this story for years.
Mm.
Probably 5, 5, 6 years now, and you know, sometimes you just go back to the drawing board or the, typewriter, and
I
just,
get it.
I gotta change the scene up. It's not punching me in the way it needs to. So,
Now, what exactly in the grand scheme of things was the driving force at basically bringing Frankenstein's monster back into the fold?
well, I think it was necessary. I'm never a real big fan of the spin-off kind of series where like you have a main kind of character, but we're going to spin that off and we're going to focus on this other character, but then the main character never makes an appearance. Like
Right.
I hate that. So I definitely felt like the original monster needed to be in there somewhere, even if he's not in it until more than halfway through the book.
Hmm.
Because again, I felt it was necessary to kind of honor the original subject matter. Um, I felt it was necessary for the fans' delightment, just because I felt like they needed to kind of have a connection with that character. And I don't know, in ways I just had this vision of doing like a cowboy version of Frankenstein. So I felt like I need to put this guy in here somewhere. I need to figure that out. And I think I got him in there fairly organically in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. As a matter of fact, there was this one look panel of him basically driving the wagon in, and he almost looks like the main antagonist for Jeepers Creepers, the way that the way that he's drawn because of the hat and everything. I was just like,
Yeah, a little
look,
bit.
he looks cool. And as a matter of fact, I mean, the artwork in this particular issue, did you get new artists?
No, that's all me.
That's all you.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, look, man, you're progressing.
Yeah. Well, when you draw, like 2 pages a day for years on end.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because like for one, the cover art is amazing because I remember the last one for issue 4 was the full on cover with Frankenstein right on the front. This one has a detail of like almost what the Confederate Army is going to look like once it starts building its hordes and driving against the Union Army, and it's sick looking, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it's funny. I did the cover for 5, and I really liked it. I got to the end of it. I put it next to 4, and I just felt like the backgrounds were very similar, very like fiery, battle kind of
Yeah.
scene. Which you know isn't a bad thing.
Oh.
It's not bad to brand your covers together so that when they all come together, they look like they go together. But I don't know. I just felt like 5 needed a little bit extra. So after I was all done with it, I took another look at it and I thought, I could throw in like a nice big like lightning crack in the top and maybe give myself like an extra light source to kind of bounce off and give some edge light to some of my character. And that worked really well. It's a similar vibe to 4, but it has a little bit of extra something in there that's different that just sets it apart. And so, I think that all came together really well. I, I wanted to do a variant for this one. I just wasn't. It wasn't in my budget this time around. I did a variant cover for the last Kickstarter for issue 4, but I'm definitely going to do some for the final book because
Yeah.
6 is around the corner. I don't know if I'll be able to get to that crowdfunder this year. I'm hopeful that I can get to it later on in the end of this year. but you know, this issue I'm still in production on, so I'm gonna need some more time to finish it. But again, I want to do more in the way of making the Kickstarter a little bit more robust. So we're going to do some variants for issue 6. I'm going to try to add some extra things I haven't been doing just yet, maybe some extra like posters and things like that. But yeah, it's a really fun opportunity to do something just for myself for a change.
I gotta say, because and just to speak more a little bit about the artwork, there's this one particular panel, and I think you also have it in the sample pages, where Dr. Frankenstein is actually giving the bride an anesthetic, and she
Yep.
starts to go through this like fever dream of seeing like basically like phases of herself and phases of others throughout like this nightmarish like little panel.
Yeah.
Could you describe that whole thing?
Sure.
Is it just her wrestling with her demons?
So there's one little element in there that I didn't quite like make super overt, but in issue 4 we sort of do a flashback of where the monster has been this whole time.
Oh,
We do these little flashbacks of where like Victor's been, where the monster's been, you know, that sort of thing.
yep.
And in his travels, because he basically is just an animal, you know,
Yep.
wandering through the forest, relying on instinct and hunger. And so he finds these psychedelic mushrooms, and he takes the mushrooms because he's really, you know, hungry.
Yeah.
And it acts as a neural connector to repair the damaged pathways within his mind to allow his mind to, you know, reconnect itself and grow and learn. And so there's a scene in there where you start to see how the monster's mind was repaired, and even given his same sort of intellect again, not his memories but his intellect.
Okay.
And so they, you know, discover that magic mushrooms is sort of a key of helping to repair the mind of a reanimated person.
I like it.
So when you look at that scene, he's injecting her with an anesthetic to calm her, but then they're also feeding her a little bit of magic mushrooms to get her to kind of do the same thing. And so what you're seeing there is a psychedelic, you know, experience that she's having, or a psychedelic vision that she's having,
Hmm.
where, you know, in the panel there you see her, you know, kind of melding into this nightmarish sort of version of herself, very
Hmm.
evil and, you know, like demonic. And then that melds into this like vision of her without skin that's just like on fire. So maybe like her skin is just like burnt off, you know,
Hmm.
and then into like this skeleton that's just like really just at the core of who she is. So like the whole point of the progression is to sort of show, and this is something that's akin to the psychedelic experience, where it shows you like you are, this body is not you, like you are this like
Hmm.
endless consciousness. So let's like strip it all away and like show you what you really are underneath, which is just nothing, bones, nothing, you know. So like that's the precipice before this change in the vision, where she has this reconnection to a moment where while she was being dissected, she wakes up and she's on the table and eating.
That's when it shows that she's
Yeah,
completely chopped apart.
right, right.
That makes excellent sense. Yo, all right, so I'm glad I asked that question. I'm real glad I asked that question. So, and to be honest, the way I look at it, uh I'm almost fearful a little bit of how you're going to do issue 6. So where you talked about how you wrote it like a good amount of times, because I feel like if you wanted to, there could be more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am always one to add a few little stingers at the end of my stories, just to kind of tease, you know, what could happen next. And with this one, I believe I wrote 3, but I'm not sure if I'll actually do 3. I think I might just keep it to the 2, but maybe I'll do the third. Just for fun. We'll see. Anyway, so one of my thoughts was, and I talked about this on a couple of podcasts. One of the thoughts I had for post this arc, is to do, because a lot of people have been asking me, do the other classic monsters like werewolf and Dracula and Mummy, do they appear in the story, And they don't in this. However, one of the things I had thought of is I could do another story post the end of this, Frankenstein arc and do one about, a werewolf character.
Hmm.
But it's set during the same time period, just in a different part of the country, because the Civil War was happening all over
All
the country,
over.
right? So, I could travel to another part of the country where the conflict is still happening. And maybe that was one of the other, potential stories that the Confederacy has been investigating as something that could help them win the war. So there's maybe like a little contingent of people over there that are investigating this,
Hmm.
and there's a version of a werewolf, that is hunting them, or they think they're hunting it, whatever the story may be. But then I bring in, the Daniel character, and
Right.
he's sort of tangentially kind of connected to it. But I would maybe run another connection to the original characters throughout all of these other stories, so that maybe I do another, version of the Frankenstein characters at the very, very end or something. I don't know. But one of the thoughts I had is doing like a creature of the Black Lagoon, but it's like a voodoo kind of thing in Louisiana.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, even one of the thoughts I had was to do like, and this might sound a little strange, but to do like John Wilkes Booth as like the Phantom of the Opera, because he was connected to acting on stage. Uh,
Right. He was an
so
actor.
I don't know, like that could be interesting. Um, I've, like I said, I've got a lot of different ideas as to where I could take this world forward post the end of issue 6.
Now, are you are you someone that basically has always thought that the classic movie monsters were all a part of the same universe?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've always sort of envisioned it like that, because to me it's just more fun. I'm always that like Abbott and Costello kid.
Hmm.
Uh, all the, Frankenstein meets the werewolf. That's actually the reason why whenever I pitch the book, I typically say like Frankenstein meets the Civil War, because
Hmm.
anybody who knows Frankenstein meets knows what comes after that. So, and what that's related to. So I always sort of wanted to do this. It's funny because my college thesis project was a Universal Monsters themed video game that I did like all the character designs for. I did like all the keyframe designs. I wrote the whole story for the game. So it's always been in my blood. I guess I just need
Definitely
to.
always been in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Definitely. Now, for the most part, when you're looking at basically how the totality of this ends, and I know we talked about how in the, of course, construction of these 6 issues, you've also had time to, of course, spare your art talents to other projects.
Oh yeah.
Do you still are you, in between all issues 4 and 5, which we talked about? Uh, what else is Dave Schwartz doing?
So I've got actually a couple of books that I've been working on. A few that are coming to Kickstarter are already on Kickstarter.
Mhm.
So one of the other ones that is on Kickstarter right now is called Retcon and the Little One. It's by Sean Wood. It's been on Kickstarter a little longer than mine. It's already passed its goal. They're working on stretch goals right now. But basically, it's a story about a world where um, we basically eat our preservative laced junk food into this zombie, disease that transforms everybody into these like, you know, I call them like compost zombies, where like everybody's just slowly rotting into
Oh,
compost. And so instead of it being all blood and guts and gore, it's all like dirt and muck and, weeds and stuff. It's
deterioration.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't quite gotten to it yet, but one of the visions I had for the visuals of the story is to do a couple of just like piles of compost, but they have just like bits of people still like hanging out, almost like a zombie that's chopped off at the legs that's just like crawling around.
Right.
Uh, so anyway, in that world, the humans built these robots to fight the zombies, but the zombies overtook them. So the robots, their prime directive was to save humanity. And so with basically humanity overrun and there's nobody left, the robots went into disrepair. And so the main character, Retcon, who's like the described to me as the Captain America of robots, um, hears the scream of a little girl and wakes up and is basically following his prime directive to protect her. And that's the main premise of the book. So it's got a lot of like Walking Dead kind of things. It's got a lot of Samurai Jack kind of feel to it. I did a sort of a lighter toned kind of approach to the artwork, even though it's very bloody and gory and that kind of zombie story. I
Yeah.
still the main character is a little girl, so I kind of wanted to make the art a little more kid friendly,
Okay.
as much as I can with a bunch of gore and blood. But that book's on Kickstarter right now. If you guys want to go check it out. I also have a book that's coming to Kickstarter soon called Dino Knights. And that one is basically Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but they are dinosaurs. And it's a story that's set across time. So that we do a lot of time jumping back and
Mhm.
forth, mainly between Arthurian time, like medieval time, and the modern era. But then we go to the future a couple of times. So that's a really fun book. It's very like 90s animated, Saturday morning cartoon type style art. I chose the color palette specifically to be indicative of that time period. So that's a really fun book. That one's all made. We're completely done with it.
Yeah.
It's just now coming to Kickstarter. So once we get it rolling on Kickstarter, the writer Zach Chapman, he's just going to be hitting people with issue 2, issue 3, issue 4. So that's going to roll out like really quickly once we get going with it. Um,
Excellent.
but yeah, and then I got another book that I haven't started working fully on. I've got about 6 pages into it. But it's a continuation of a series I did with Caleb Palmquist called Vampire
Vampire.
Detective
Yep.
Space.
Vampire Detective in Space.
Yeah, so we're doing a noir story. It's totally different than the original. It's sort of set in a black and white, detective noir story, but it's all a simulation. So the main character James is sort of trapped within the simulation, and it's really really fun. Lots of traditional, noir dialogue.
Right.
Caleb does a really great job writing it. It sounds very authentic to what you would know if you ever, read all those, old noir books. A lot of inner monologue kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of other stuff. Hard to really name it all. I do a lot
Yeah.
of little short books here and there, 6 to 8 page little short stories for anthologies. But yeah, it's my full time gig, so I'm just constantly cranking on books right now.
That's
So
great, man. Now issue 5, of course, was about 22 days left.
yep.
I believe what are you like $200 away from the goal? So
Yeah, we're something pretty close to that. Yeah, we're about sitting a little north of 90% of the goal.
yep.
So I was hopeful that we'd be able to get it within the first week. That happened earlier today, but we're pretty damn close to the goal. And in looking at the metrics compared from this one to the last one, we're doing phenomenally better
Oh
this time
yeah.
around than the last time around. It took me almost 2 full weeks to get to where I'm at now last time around. So I'm doing pretty well with it. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of customers out there like to see a bunch of issues that are basically almost at the completion of a full scale trade.
Yeah,
And they were like, I want to read the whole story. So like the fact that this is like almost there, I can imagine what number 6 is going to turn into.
that's what I'm hopeful that once we do get to the end that things will pick up a little bit. Mainly because I have just a lot of really cool ideas of what I want to do with it. My biggest goal is I want to make a really nice hardcover trade.
Mm.
I think like a nice hardcover trade would just be really, really cool. Even if it were like just, I mean, again, printing restrictions, but even if it were just like a little larger than the actual like comic book aspect ratio, that
Mm.
might be kind of interesting. Um, just for some of the bigger pages, I think would really help them to, just bounce off the page. But yeah, I really want to do a hardcover. I have this dream of making. Do you remember like the old like plastic models that they had of the classic Universal monsters? It was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Frankenstein in a graveyard,
Yep.
or I want to do that for like my cowboy Frankenstein. Like get a 3D modeler and a 3D printer to actually make like a constructible model that like you clip apart and glue
Right.
together and paint it yourself.
Piece
I
by piece.
Yeah, and make the box jacket for it and everything to make it look all retro. I think that would be super dope. I don't know how and what the price point would be on that, but
Right.
I did some really cool things with the first campaign I did years ago. I did these like really cool. Actually, I got one right here. It broke a little bit, but I made these like little busts of Victor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and they turned out pretty cool. They're just the I had him do the eyeglasses, and the eyeglass parts are so delicate that if you just touch them the wrong way, they break. So that one's missing half of his eyeglasses.
Dang.
But
Well, hey, look, I'm sure like through Kickstarter and other things, you probably find a 3D sculptor out there.
oh yeah, oh trust me, they're hitting me up left and right.
Gotcha.
They're just trying to get something, and I get it. I got to hustle out there. So.
Yeah. Well, when do you think you'd be able to drop issue 6? Would it be something that you'd probably be able to put out like next year, or would it be like by the end of this year?
I mean, I'm hopeful. Like my original plan was to do issue 6, like the last issue around like the Halloween time, because I just felt like the synergy of all that would be really
Yeah.
nice. Um, I don't know if I can really realistically hit that because, I'm still a bit in production on issue 5. I'm not targeting to really be able to deliver it until like midway through this year, like July.
Hmm.
To give myself plenty of time. I only really work on this one day a week because I have full time gigs that I kind of have to devote more of my time to.
Yeah.
Plus, I teach part time at a college, so I'm a busy guy.
I,
So I hope that I can get to that time frame. I think that
mhm.
would be great. But like I said, issue 6 is a double issue. It's nearly 40 pages, and I think with my extra, I haven't actually done the page count on the final
Yeah.
because, like I said, I did a couple of different like little stingers at the end of the story, and each one of them is like probably 4 to 6 pages. So I mean, it could wind up being actually a little north of 40 pages when it's all said and done. So I don't know. We'll see. I hope that I can get at least a Kickstarter done for the end of the year.
Yeah.
If not, then it'll probably be around the same time next year.
Perfect, man.
Yeah.
Look, all the best. I thoroughly enjoyed the story. Can't wait for issue 6. Um, Definitely am looking forward to what you're basically putting out, and I'll give you a congratulations in advance because it looks like issue 5 is pretty much there.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, man. I'm hopeful that we can get there soon, so that we can just start working on stretch goals. My first stretch goal is actually pretty cool. It's an all backers stretch goal because a lot of stretch goals are physical only.
Yeah.
But my first one is all backers, so everybody will get a digital PDF version of, well, not PDF, digital audio track of a 4 song soundtrack that I had made years ago for the first campaign. It's 4 songs. Each one of them is got a little bit of a different vibe, but they're just instrumental. So
Yeah.
you sort of just put them on in the background. You can kind of read the book while you're listening. I did my best to sort of time it so that it feels like you can, listen to a track and get through an
through
issue,
the
and
book.
listen to another track, get through another issue, that kind of thing.
So I've noticed that before. So what you're providing to the consumer is sonic translation.
Yeah, just expanding the experience a little bit. I feel like, especially with comics, there's some opportunity to expand the experience. One of the other stretch goals I have on there, it's one of my larger stretch goals, but I wanted to do like an old radio show sort of telling of the issue. So do all the character voices myself, do any narration myself, do
Hmm.
all like sound effects, have some music in there, really make it sound like an old, radio show would sound. Um,
Hmm.
and who knows, maybe I'll eventually get to do it, but I put it pretty high up there. I think it's at my $6,000 level because it would be quite an undertaking for me to have to do that. But I'm willing to do it. I would take that extra money and set aside a couple of weeks out of my schedule and just say, hey, this is all I'm doing for my fans so that I can get them what they deserve. Because it's like I said, I wanted to expand the experience for people, and I think some of these stretch goals can do that.
Excellent. Dave, I appreciate you doing this with me. Thank you again.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate you letting me on and talk about my Frankenstein story. So,
Absolutely. So Confederate Monster, of course, is got 22 days left on Kickstarter. So got a little more than 3 weeks. Uh, Dave, I appreciate you doing this once again. We will, of course, more than likely have to talk after issue 6 drops.
for sure, I look forward to it.
All right. So for everybody here at the Facts Project, David Schwartz, Confederate Monster, out now on Kickstarter, issues 1 through 5, and issue 0 is there too, correct?
Yeah, issue 0. Yeah, so technically it's six issues that we're into right now, with the last one wrapping up with 7, technically, with issue 0.
All right. So for everybody here at the Facts Project, we will see you guys next time. We are out.